Okay, this is a troubleshooting video. We've got this thought processor here. The builder had some problems with it. Had some difficulty with getting it to turn on. So we've had a look at it, and there's a leg here that's not connected properly. So that's one of the problems. And then we have solder joints which were joined together on the chips. So that's going to cause all sorts of problems with not connecting and short circuiting and things like that, so that needs fixing. And then these joints here are also joined together, which shouldn't be. Some joints don't matter if they join together like these two here, but as you can see, there's not actually any solder on there, so they need to be redone. And then there's these some of the other solder joints are either cracked or they don't have enough solder on them. Some have solder on them, but they're not actually connecting to the little metal pads. So I'm just going to go through and give it some more solder and try and unattach those joints that are joined with the legs. For them to kind of stay in properly, you kind of need to put quite a bit of solder in there just to make sure that they're okay. And add more solder. It's important to add more solder because otherwise you might end up with a sort of dry joint. And the person that built this, it might have been a problem that they might have been using a solder iron that wasn't very good. That might have caused them some of the problems that they had. But it's still good though, because it's fixable and the problems aren't particularly bad. They're just like, it's not like anything's been ripped off or anything like that, so everything is fixable. And you know, soldering generally is not that tidy, so it's just a case of kind of tidying it up a little bit more. And this joint here has got too much solder on it, so I'll just like reflow some of that. Let's do those two joints that I mentioned before. These two, it doesn't matter if they touch each other, so we've got two joints that are clearly like very close together like that. It's okay if they touch because it's not going to cause any short circuiting, but the chip legs are particularly important not to have all the legs touching. Sometimes you can just sort of put the soldering iron in between the two joints, and that will separate the solder. And other times you have to use a solder sucker, which I've got here ready, but these ones have been okay so far. And just sort of clean the soldering iron as you do that, so that the excess blobs that come off can get cleaned out. And that's kind of caused a bit of a blob here, so I'm going to try and get that out. So that's kind of sucked it up. So even though that's not particularly tidy yet, that's it's kind of separated those legs from joining each other. It seems like they've tried to plug in the thought processor, and it's not worked. And I'm assuming that it probably didn't short circuit because one of the legs wasn't even joining, so hopefully that means that the chip is okay and we won't have to we'll have to replace the one with the bent leg, but we won't have to replace all of them. Some of the solder joints, they were kind of melting the solder onto the component but not onto the
board. Yeah, if you don't heat up both the pieces of metal that you're trying to solder together, and it tends to just stick to one or the other instead of both.
And that sometimes is just because of a bad soldering iron, but even with a good soldering iron, it's never perfect. It's
also, if the board's not clean, sometimes it's usually a good idea to clean the board first with alcohol or something.
Before you solder, it's good not to handle the board too much with your fingers, because it leaves bits of grease on the board, and that can stop it from connecting. But yeah, if you think it's got too much grease on it, just clean it with some IPA. And like I said, you have to be careful to make sure that all of these joints are not dried out, because what happens with the solder is that the more you kind of put the soldering iron on it, the more it dries it out, so that there won't be a good connection. Like that one just sort of lifted it right off, so it was already quite dry there. But yeah, it's not like it's too far gone. It's just it's a person's kind of first attempt at soldering, so it's still quite good. Yeah. One of the hardest things is when someone puts the component in the wrong place, and then you have to actually get it out, and that can be quite messy, and sometimes it can lift the pad off the board, and then that causes more problems. Because the solder dries out, you kind of need to always adding more to it, and then you kind of get to know that when it sort of dries and doesn't have any kind of cracking on it or anything, then that's kind of okay, and you can sort of reheat it and pull it back off with the solder sucker if you need to. It's kind of a much better technique than trying to pull it off when it's dry. Just going through and resoldering some of these little ones that sort of didn't have enough solder on them. I like to use a pointy tip for these kind of things, because it's kind of too much detail to be able to get in there with the sort of the flat tip which you get, so I really prefer this kind of tip for this kind of work. I've got an even pointier one that I use for surface mount board. And what we're going to do is get it to some point where it's kind of good enough where we can test it, where it's not sort of perfect, but we can, fix up some of the more cosmetic problems afterwards and just test that it's actually going to work. And if it works, then that will be a good sign that everything's kind of not too badly damaged or anything.
We'd usually have a fan on to get rid of the fumes, but just for this video we've not switched on because it's too noisy.
Yeah, health and safety first, obviously. Okay, so the chip, as we mentioned before, the leg has been bent, but the chips are all in the right place, so that's okay. So it's just this one that needs, and all the other chips look fine, it's just this one leg. So that can happen sometimes where you just sort of bend it and then it gets damaged, so that's kind of what's happened there. It's good to kind of do it gently rather than forcing it in, and just sort of, press them in so they look straight. So as you can see, that leg has not only bent, but it's kind of just bent completely over like that. So I think the easiest thing to do is just put in a new chip, which we have. So going through and just cutting off some of the legs.
It's best to cut them off pretty close to the board, just because if they're sticking out, they can end up bending over and shorting out on something.
Also, when you chop the legs, you can kind of see things a bit better, what's going on.
Yeah.
I think when there's like a huge blob on them like that, I just sort of try and get the solder off and then chop the leg off.
Oh yeah.
Like on that one, so I won't try and chop that one. It's always good to get reading glasses if you have problems with your eyesight.
Yeah, it's quite hard to see somehow, because the solder's shiny as well, it somehow hard to
You
see.
don't always see
Sometimes you look at it and it looks fine, and you look again and you see all these blobs you didn't even notice because the light shining on it makes it hard to see what you're looking at.
If you just heat up the solder and the component, what happens sometimes is it just attaches the solder to the component and you don't get any attachment to your board, so you're not going to get anything working if that's what's happening. But I guess it's kind of just sort of showing that things can be fixed, and the reason we're doing this video is just sort of to help people with their own troubleshooting if they're experiencing a problem, how they might be able to go through and have a bit more confidence about fixing stuff, and kind of realising that when things get messy it's not the end of the world. Like, you can often still check and go through and make sure everything's okay.
It's a good idea if you do make a mistake or if you need to desolder something to like take a break first. Most times when I've messed something up it's because I just tried to plow on and fix it there and then and just made it even worse. Whereas if you just go away for a bit and do it the next day, it's usually fine.
If the circuit does work and then you notice that it suddenly stopped working, sometimes what's happened is that a solder joint has cracked, and you can just go through and reflow it. Make sure you put more solder there.
Yeah, you need the flux that's in the solder to make it flow properly. You can add flux as well, like
it's all
from the
about
thing,
flux,
but
yeah.
it's kind of messy. But yeah, it does work if things are really not sticking. You can just add a load of flux.
So just trying to get these as straight as possible. Usually I just do it with my hands.
I should just press it against the desk or something, but that's not a very good way to do it because it's a nice bends in the other way. Be careful.
Yeah, so before pushing it in, just kind of get the legs and the holes. I mean, it's never easy really, it's just sort of...
Yeah, it's pretty fiddly. There, not spent. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so we're gonna just test it now. See what happens. Okay, we've gone through and looked at all the joints, and it looks like everything's connected. There was one joint which has lost one of the pads, but it looks like it doesn't matter because it's connected to another bit, which luckily means that we hopefully don't have to do anything with the rewiring. So just going to test it out.
Sounds interesting. Yes, not right.
It doesn't sound right. So
yeah, something's wrong. So I guess there's
turn it off
still
again.
some bad joints or something wrong. So it's doing something, but not working. It's still not working right. The light sensor isn't working at all. It's making.
We tested it a couple of times and the light sensor wasn't working properly, so I went through and looked at the joints again and noticed that there was still a couple joined together and a couple didn't have any flow on them. So we thought that we maybe needed to change this chip, which we thought might have fried because of the light sensor. That's the bit that kind of controls the light sensor, but actually when I reflowed some of them and separated some of the joints again, it seems to be that just noticed another one actually. It seems to be that it's working now, so
it's making some sound anyway.
it's doing kind of what it's supposed to be doing. I'll just fix this one quickly.
Mm.
Yeah, so hopefully it means that it's sorted out now. But we did try it 2 or 3 times and it wasn't working as it should be working. So it's okay now. Yeah, so the light sensor's working now. Touchpads are it's pretty much working okay now. So we've tested it and it works well. We've tested the input. All these knobs seem to work okay. The LDR is working okay. The touchpads seem to work okay, although they never do anything that dramatic, but it's, you get some sort of change in sound. So what we'll do now is just go through and just double make sure that all these joints are okay, because, when you look at it the 5th or 10th or 20th time, you always notice that there's something that could be maybe slightly better. Although sometimes if something's working properly, it's best to kind of just leave it alone. So it's kind of, because you might end up doing more damage. So we'll just kind of go through and make sure there's nothing that obviously is going to cause a problem, and then that should be it sorted. Okay.